They dragged her into the center of the village. The drums echoed in the dark, matching the beating of my heart. I could see the moon reflecting in her large blue eyes. Their hands trembled as they held their spears and machetes. The villagers looked at one another, waiting for someone, anyone, to make the first move. They were afraid of her, but more than that, they were afraid of what she might become. The day had begun like any other. I was sitting outside my mother's hut, grinding a goosey, when I heard the whispers. At first, they were low and unsure, but soon I heard them clearly. She has the eyes of a spirit. She is not one of us. They say she cursed the chief's son. And what about the snakes? Someone whispered. I've seen them crawling around her hut. Not a single one strikes at her, not even the deadliest ones. It's like they fear her or listen to her. The talk was about Lela, a black girl who had strange blue eyes. Her eyes were different than anyone else's and seemed to stare into your soul. The villagers had never seen anything like that, and they bullied her and accused her of all sorts of things. So, Lela stayed to herself. She was quiet and always sat alone by the edge of the forest, far from the mockery and accusations of the village. But there was more to Lela than her unusual eyes. She had a way with the animals, even snakes. She had made a habit of tending to the wounded creatures that stumbled from the forest into our village, even the dangerous ones that the hunters wanted for meat. Still, the villagers didn't see her as kind. They saw her as cursed, capable of controlling the wild. Some said she talked to the trees, while others claimed they had seen her float through the mist without making a sound. I never paid much attention to the rumors. People in the village loved to gossip, especially about those who didn't fit in, those who were not like them. But this was different. The village was restless. Even the elders seemed uneasy, and when the sun began to set, they called for a meeting. I stood at the back, hiding behind my older brother. I was curious, but I didn't want anyone to see me listening. The chief, his face stern and cold, spoke first. There has been trouble in our village, he said. My son fell sick 3 nights ago, and now his fever burns hotter than the midday sun. The crops have not grown this season, and our hunters come back with nothing. Something is wrong. He paused, looking around the circle. We must cleanse our village. The ancestors are angry, and we must find the cause. A murmur ran through the crowd, and then an elder spoke up. His voice was calm and steady. I have seen her, he said. I have seen Lela wandering at night. She whispers to the wind, and the wind answers her. She is possessed by a witch. The chief nodded slowly, as if this confirmed what he already knew. We will bring her to the center of the village tonight, he declared. We will rid ourselves of her before the next sunrise. My stomach turned as I heard his words. I didn't believe in curses or dark spirits, but I knew what the villagers could do when they were afraid. I remembered when the harvest had failed years ago. They'd blamed old Basie, the village rainmaker. The memory of his terrified cries still haunted me. They had cast him out, and he had never returned. Fear, I realized, could make good people do terrible things. As the crowd scattered, I caught sight of Lela's hut. It stood alone, near the edge of the forest, far from the others. I had passed by it many times, but I had never seen anyone visit her. The door was closed, but through the small window, I could see a faint light flickering inside. I don't know what made me go there. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else. But before I knew it, my feet were moving, carrying me toward the hut. I knocked softly, hoping no one would see me. For as long as I could remember, Lela had been the girl at the edge of the village. the girl that the colorful bird at her shoulder always eats from her palms. But there was that one harmattan, years ago, when she had smiled at me. A real, open smile. Lela had pointed to the bushy path where my playful dog ran in the forest, and for a fleeting instant, she wasn't the strange, blue-eyed girl with whispered rumors behind her back. She was just Lela. The door creaked open, and there she was. Her eyes seemed to study me for a long moment before she stepped aside to let me in. The air smelled of plants. There were bundles of healing herbs hanging from the ceiling, and a small fire burned in the corner. "Careful where you step," she said softly, her eyes shifting to a corner of the room. There, curled up at the opposite side of the small fire, was a snake, coiled and silent. It watched me with unblinking eyes, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The villagers would have seen this and run. They would have called her a witch. But I knew this was just one of the many creatures she had nursed back to health after it had escaped a hunter's trap, its scales torn and bleeding. "You're not afraid of them?" I asked quietly. Lela shook her head, a faint smile pulling at her lips. "Animals don't harm unless they're threatened. It's people you should be afraid of." After a few seconds of silence, she asked, "What do you want?" I came to warn you," I stammered. "The village, they're planning something. Tonight. They think you're the reason for the chief's son being sick. They think you've cursed us." Her expression didn't change. She didn't seem surprised. "They've always been afraid of me," she said quietly. "People fear what they do not understand." Her words felt like a stone sinking in my chest. Had I too been afraid of her? Had I believed the whispers, even if only a little? I didn't know what to say. She was right. The village had always looked at her differently, but that didn't mean she was dangerous, did it? "What will you do?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "There is nothing to be done. When people believe in something strongly enough, there's no changing their minds." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had hoped she would have some kind of plan, something that would stop what was coming. But she seemed resigned, almost accepting of her fate. "I won't run," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "If I run, they'll come after me. And it won't end until someone pays the price." I wanted to tell her that I believed her, that her eyes are not a curse, and that she wasn't the monster they made her out to be. But the words stayed locked behind my teeth, and I could only nod, my heart breaking in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. The drums had already begun to beat in the distance. The sound was low at first, but it grew louder with each passing moment. My chest tightened. The villagers were coming. "I have to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. Lela nodded. "Go. You don't want to be here when they arrive." I turned and rushed out of the hut, my heart beating fast. The night air was cold, and the drums were louder now, filling the silence with their steady, haunting rhythm. I could see the flicker of torches moving toward the center of the village. The crowd was gathering. By the time I reached the square, the chief and the elders were already there, standing tall and solemn. The villagers, clutching their spears and knives, formed a circle around them. And then I saw Lela walking toward them, her head held high. No one had to drag her from her hut. She came on her own, without a fight, without a word. The silence was heavy as she stepped into the center of the circle. Her bare feet left soft prints in the dirt, and her long hair swayed with the wind. The chief stepped forward, his face hard and unforgiving. He raised his hand, signaling for the drums to stop. The sudden silence was deafening. "Lela," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness, "you have brought misfortune to this village. The ancestors have spoken. You must be cast out, or we will all suffer." For a moment I thought she would argue, plead her case, say something to defend herself. But she didn't. She simply stood there, her blue eyes fixed on the chief, her face calm, almost serene. The villagers began to chant, low and rhythmic, their voices filled with fear and anger. I could feel the tension building, like a storm ready to break. My throat tightened as I watched them move closer, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. Suddenly, Lela raised her arms, her palms facing the sky. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. The wind picked up, swirling around her, lifting her hair. Some villagers stepped back, their eyes wide with terror. "Stop!" someone shouted from the crowd, but no one moved. The air was filled with energy, and for a moment, it seemed like the earth itself was holding its breath. I couldn't look away. I was transfixed, caught in the strange, unexplainable power of that moment. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The wind died down, and Lela lowered her arms. The village was still, silent, as if the world had paused. But the fear didn't leave their faces. The chief, his voice trembling now, raised his spear. "She is a witch," he cried. "She must be killed before she destroys us all." The crowd surged forward, and my heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to shout, to stop them, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was watch as they closed in on her, their faces twisted with fear and ignorance. Lela didn't scream, she didn't fight, she simply stood there, waiting for what was to come. They found her body the next morning, lying still and cold in the square. The village was quiet, but there was no relief, no celebration, only silence. The chief's son remained sick, and the crops did not grow. The curse, if there ever was one, had not been lifted. And though the villagers had rid themselves of their fear, they couldn't rid themselves of the guilt. I never forgot that night, the night they came for her. The night I stood by and did nothing. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still hear her voice whispering through the trees. Please like and subscribe.